All right, so hi, I'm Christa Conforti. I'm the IPM Coordinator for the Presidio here in San Francisco. And Chris asked me to give kind of a general update about what's going on in the Presidio IPM-wise. But really what I'm going to do is just give you two different talks about kind of what focuses for me in the past handful of years. One being how do we transition, or how do we find alternatives to Roundup? And two, how do we protect our park from the plant disease Phytopthera? So I've got two presentations separate, and this is going to count as the update to the Presidio, although it's not complete. All right, so we're going to start with our organic herbicide field trials that we've been doing over the past handful of years, which is, of course, in reaction to our desire to reduce the use of Roundup. When the IARC came out with its reclassification of Roundup, we stopped using Roundup for about 2.5 years, and as we've gotten more information, have started to use it only in very specific occasions. So we're not in a moratorium on Roundup, but we are wanting to find alternatives in an effort to really, really use it very sparingly. So a lot of what I've been doing is evaluating the organic herbicides that are on the market. So back in 2017, we took a look at two products, Avenger and Exempt. And so how many here have used Avenger? What do you think of it?
It's expensive.
All right. How about efficacy? I know, like nobody's like, yeah, I love it.
You want to do a show of hands?
How many?
Low, medium, high. Low efficacy. Raise your hand.
Medium.
Medium.
Yeah, medium. Okay. So this just kind of runs through the specifics on Avenger. Signal word is caution, and it's certified organic. How does it work? It destroys the plant cuticle, resulting in dehydration and death. It only does this on the part of the plant that it touches. So it really is just a top burn. And when you look at the human toxicity, it does have skin and respiratory irritant issues, but usually only with industrial strength exposure. So it's not a huge issue for applicators. All right, so that's Avenger. And then we tested it against this material called Exempt, which is a clove oil and salt material. I don't know if this is even still on the market, but it was back in 2017. No signal word, it's exempt from EPA registration because clove oil and salt are on the generally recognized as safe lists. And it's certified organic, has the same kind of mode of action. It has additional human toxicity issues in terms of might cause nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and can trigger asthma. So this is just to say that, as we all know, even though herbicides might be organic, they're not without risks to the applicator.
You can die from drinking too much water.
People have died, yes. Yeah.
Anything else after that?
All right, so those were the two that we wanted to test against each other back in 2017. So I've just got a couple of images here. This is, we did do a replicated trial, replicated plot trial with this, and I'm just showing you one plot for each. This is what the plots looked like ahead of the treatment. It's hard to tell, but that's mostly malva, grasses, some plantain, in the plots, and these are what we call fence line areas in the Presidio, which tend to have this kind of suite of weed species. Okay, so this was the day after treatment. So we did get some relatively good knockback, and then this was 1 month after treatment, and it's hard to see, but the green growth is coming back, both the grasses and the broadleaves, but it's not terrible. So I really did try to push our applicators to use it, and they did, but they were kind of like you guys. They were like, meh, it's not great. It's better than nothing, but we really want something better than this. And so
they're about the same level of efficacy?
They were about the same level of efficacy, and because Avenger was cheaper than Exempt, we went, yes, was cheaper than Exempt.
Wow.
Back out of it, and it's like
Yeah, so we went with Avenger, but we didn't really see any significant difference between the two. All right, so then this material, Weed Slayer, came on the market. And how many of you have experience with Weed Slayer? All right, it was hard to get. Like, it came on the market and then it left the market really quick because there was an issue with labeling. And then so we put in an order for it, and then we waited for months and months and months until the issue with labeling was resolved. And we finally, about 3 or 4 months ago, did a field trial with it. And we decided not to do a replicated field trial, instead just side by side, Avenger and Weed Slayer. But all right, so this is what Weed Slayer is. It's clove oil, like the Exempt, but it comes, it's not only clove oil. It's clove oil in one jug plus microbes in another jug, and the manufacturer won't tell us which microbes they are. And they also recommend that you use it with a pH reducer to get your water down to a pH of about 4. And they recommend that it be used with a surfactant. So, and the suppliers will sell all of these to you as like a kit. Although you could, do your own pH reducer or organic surfactant. But we bought it all together in one kind of lump sum. All right, so it controls broadleaves and grasses. It's non-selective, and the label is just general. It can be used in any type of landscape. All right, it's no signal word. It's exempt from EPA registration, and it's certified organic. And so the way it works is very similar to the way the other clove oils work.
You said it's exempt from registration. So just for clarity, that means they don't have to have a signal word. Doesn't mean that it's lower risk.
Right, right, yeah.
We're talking about GHS?
GHS?
No, we're talking about EPA labels. So if it's exempt from EPA registration, there's no label requirements for signal words.
And that's federal only, right? Federal EPA, right?
Federal and state both.
Well, GHS is international.
GHS is a different, that's a different system. Yeah, that's more for SDSs.
Okay.
But it's important to realize because there are some people who advertise no signal word
As a
plus.
proxy for it's safe, whereas
Yeah.
that's not necessarily true. Yeah.
Right. Sorry to interrupt.
All right. So it works it works in the same way as other clove oils. However, it's got these it's recommended that you use it in a way that makes it easier to travel through the plant. So the low pH allows for better penetration beyond the cuticle, and presumably the microbes facilitate more penetration and more movement through the plant. So the manufacturers are calling it translocation. I don't know if that's actually true, but that's what they're calling it. And it's so it has a better movement through the plant, and so it's actually not just killing it on the cuticle level, but presumably in more portions of the plant.
What we're looking at is we want a chemical that goes down and kills the
I know you do.
perennials.
I know.
Like dandelions.
I know. And so which is why we're testing this, and I'm saying it's the manufacturer saying it's translocation. I'm a little uncomfortable thinking that that's 100% true. All right, so, and it's human toxicity, same as any clove oil material, but like I said, we don't know what the microbes are, so can't do a toxicity evaluation on that. All right, so we chose just one area. It's kind of a little blurry in this picture, but just one area of what I consider a landscape bed with landscape bed weeds. This is not a planted landscape bed, but it's just a weedy landscape bed, which we took a look at what was growing there, and primarily it's plantain, mallow, and grasses. But we also had some bindweed, some sow thistle, some scarlet pimpernel, some blackberry, and some cudweed. So again, a pretty good suite of what we generally find in our landscape beds, our roadsides. So we kind of split that site down the middle. This is us mixing, and I put this picture in here just because, as you saw, it's got 4 parts to it, so it's a little bit more complicated of a mix than your average mix, but it's totally doable. It's doable.
Are those all packaged separately?
They're all packaged separately. Yeah. All right, so after you've mixed all your materials together, we split the bed down the middle. One side got treated with Avenger, the other side got treated with Weed Slayer. And this is what it looked like before treatment. And this is what it looked like 1 week after treatment. And I did the Weed Slayer application. So I was like, oh God, what did I do wrong? This is not looking good. and my coworker who did the Avenger treatment said, like, come on, Christa, give it a minute. Don't freak out. So this is week 2 where they're like, oh, okay, now they're neck and neck. And this is week 3, and I'm starting to feel better about my applicating skills. And this is week 4, and I'm starting to think, oh, maybe Weed Slayer really is significantly better at getting to more parts of the plant. And this is week 5, and I'm still feeling that way. Jump ahead to week 8, and it does look better. It's hard to see in this picture, but we've got a little bit of growth coming back. But it really held. This is yesterday. This is 14 weeks after the application and after some heavy rains. And you can see it's not perfect, but in comparison, it's significantly better. Our applicators are really, really pleased with these results and are looking for harder tests on it, because this is kind of a relatively easy test. This was a mowed area it had blackberry in there, so there were some really tough weeds. Yes, Chris?
Well, I forgot to ask if you're okay with us asking questions.
Yeah.
What kind of weeds were coming back?
It's mostly plantain and a little bit of blackberry, which I was a little bit surprised at. I don't really know how to explain it, because there is some plantain in here that is 100% dead and not coming back, and there is some plantain in there that did come back. So maybe it was, maybe I under-applied on some of the individual plants. I don't have a good explanation for why some of the plantain is gone and some of it is coming back.
Did you try it on poison oak?
Yes, hold that thought.
Are you doing like 100%?
I forget.
Yes, that was my aim.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Weed Slayer at 2%, Avenger at 10%?
No, Avenger's not, is it? I can't remember.
I saw it undiluted.
It's pretty high.
It's high. I can't remember if it's, I didn't mix the Avenger, I don't remember, but it's, yeah.
And one other question, was there any pH adjustment on the Avenger?
No.
Or was it?
No. Mm-mm. Okay, so hold that thought about poison oak. First, I want to show you, so the other area of application that our applicators are always looking for ways to deal with are what we call sidewalk weeds, which we have a lot of sidewalks near buildings, near cars, and weed whacking tends to break windows. And so applicators are always wanting to use Roundup in this situation. And it's one of those situations where we're like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And so they say, well, how are we going to control the weeds? So we tested it on what we call sidewalk weeds. We've got Fumaria here, which you can see before and after. It did really well. We've also got some grasses and some oxalis, which also, well, that should say 2 weeks after, but did really well. We bumped it up to a 3% solution, and 3% is the max on the label, but the bump up was not because we thought sidewalk weeds were going to be harder than the landscape bed weeds, but because we were doing it at the same time as we were doing a poison oak application. So let me show you the poison oak application. It's a little hard to read here, but this is poison oak plus blackberry up here, and it's fully grown, woody, mature, and it didn't do very well. It's pretty hard to see in these pictures, but it browned it out and kind of gave it a little bit of a slowdown, but it was not a full control, and it's kind of hard to see. But maybe you can see here, we got browning on the edge of the leaves and general kind of chlorosis, but I wouldn't say that this is a good material if you really do need to remove mature poison oak. Does that answer your question?
As I expected.
Yeah.
Is your Himalayan blackberries?
Maybe, yes, probably. Actually, I'm not
There's a whole bunch
sure.
of blackberry species, but there's there's only one poison oak.
Yeah, it's either Himalayan or the California native. I'm honestly not sure. We've got both. All right, so that's blackberry. That's poison oak. Oh, I don't know why that's in there. All right, so this is for applicators, what goes in, and we do relatively small applications. So I've put it up per gallon of water because we tend to do it in 2 or 3 gallon backpack sprayers. So and these are all the 4 parts that you've got to add to the tank. But it's not hard to do. However, it is kind of expensive. If you think Avenger is expensive, look at Weed Slayer. And this is a little high. I ran this. I showed this number to another IPM coordinator who's been using it, and when they do their calculations, it came out to like $295 or something per 1,000 square feet. So but that was how we're using it. That's our calculations. But again, like I said, we're not using it in large areas, and it's the labor that is the major expense when we do sprays, and so this is not a game. This doesn't knock Weed Slayer out of the running for us. Like it's an acceptable cost for us, and partially because we really do want to be moving away from using Roundup and toward using materials that are more acceptable to the general public who are using the park and their park, and we want to be doing management in a way that's comfortable for the public. So that's why we're doing this. And that's all I've got on the Weed Slayer. Does anybody have questions about that?
How was it on oxalis?
So we only tested it on oxalis in a sidewalk, and it did really well on oxalis in a sidewalk. We haven't tested it in like a larger landscape setting, but now we will have the chance to do it, and we will test it.
Did you see whether it came back the following year?
What's that?
Did you see whether it came back?
So this was this year. We haven't had a chance to look at it the next year.
What species of oxalis? We have a half a dozen lovely
Pest compared.
Yeah.
Pescapre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you order from the distributor, does it come in a bundle where all that stuff is together, or do you have to? Because I saw trifle on there. Like
So
you have to order from a different.
The distributor sold it to us as a bundle,
Okay.
but we could have chosen only to buy certain parts of that bundle. Like if you've got other suppliers.
So is there tolerance on the label to use other buffers?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so you can
Yeah.
use what?
Yeah.
I was wondering if there's a way we can maybe send those microbes to a company that will test them, identify them, something.
Yeah. Do you know of any labs who do that?
That's tough.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
In Oregon, they
Soil food web. Yeah, I don't know that. Do they do to species? I know they do like functional groups.
I'm not sure if they would. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
an idea. And also,
Yeah.
is there any like testing of the soils to determine if the lower pH is affecting the soil pH?
We have not done that. My sense is that the amounts that we're putting down are not having a lasting impact. But no, we have not tested.
Hey, thanks, Krista. I'm just wondering about the poison oak trial. It looked, from the image, it looked like it was a big thicket that like went back. And were you just kind of spraying the edge of it, as a trial? Or?
Yeah, so we actually had 2 areas where we did, where we tried it on poison oak. One was in the image, and it was a large sort of like thicket. The other was a much lower, not a dense stand of poison oak, but an area where it had been pulled and was coming back, and they were much smaller, and we got the same result. So I think that sort of the woodiness and the maturity were kind of not a good match for this material.
Do you know anything about the persistence of this in the soil?
Well, what I can say is that on the area where we did the landscape bed weeds, We also sprayed it in an area where there weren't wood chips at the kind of the front of the bed. And now that I go in and I look at the Avenger versus Weed Slayer area where there weren't wood chips, I'd see the same amount of seedlings coming up in both. So my sense is that there is no persistence.
It's just gone.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I know Reckin Park was trying the pH reducer with the Avenger, and you had a big improvement, right?
Big help when you reduce it. When you treat the water first.
Yeah.
Axe or Avenger, any of these products, it definitely lets it get in. But that was just a longer. When I see here, the Weed Slayer seems to be a delayed but longer result. So you still have to go back and retreat the Avenger. You can kill things, but they do sometimes come back.
Yeah, it's a good point. The pH reducer does seem to be key. So maybe comparing Avenger without pH to Weed Slayer with a pH reducer was not fair, but was the way that we had been using it and the way that we intended to use Weed Slayer.
Is that area irrigated?
Not irrigated, but mowed.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm general public, so it's general question. I'm in Presidio infrequently, but I still see Roundup signs. Like the last one I saw in August. And
The last one you saw what?
in August.
In
I'm in August.
Oh, August, okay.
But I'm there like 3 to 5 times a month only, and I see them. And is this all this thing towards elimination of everything which is not organic or minimum risk, or is it just pesticide?
It's intended to be used in any situation where it works. So yes, it could replace other materials, not just glyphosate. Yeah.
Is it planned?
Is it planned?
Is it a plan? Are you going to?
Well, so we don't have the plan is to give these tools to the applicators, and the applicators want to be using more organic than not. So when we give them these tools, they will use it. But we don't have a policy that says you must use this everywhere. We do have a policy about where you cannot use Roundup. So that's how we get at that, not so much.
And it's like almost 5 years since it was determined to be probably.
Yeah, and like I said, we did eliminate its use for several years, but have run into issues with that in that there are certain weeds that we have found we have not successfully controlled with the organic materials or with alternatives. And it's situations where if we don't control weeds, our habitat restoration projects are going to not be able to establish the native species. So we've started to use some of it in those situations again.
And I think it's really interesting, all the different stories we're hearing about Avenger. Like when Cheryl Willen at UC did her trials, I think they were all about the same effectiveness, the different burn downs,
Right.
but Avenger was by far the most expensive. And then we heard from Kim Conte last month that they're, what they're hearing from other cities that Avenger was just out, and didn't work.
Right, I
for
know.
people.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's. God, I wish someone would do a big scientific replicated study on all of this stuff.
I mean, I think it's hard because you've got so many different weed species, you've got so many different climates, you've got, there are so many variables that I do feel like it's in part a cultural, that it's site specific.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really curious about, the microbial thing. That's new. And, yeah, I'd love to know what that is.
Hey, if you put Phytopthera in herbicide.
Well, yeah.
I think about all the things you could possibly.
Wow, that's a new marketing paradigm.
You could combine your two presentations.
Well, that is a
There's a lot of
good.
plant pathogens that are very effective.
Talk to Dr. Stephen about that one.
But it's, I think we're all kind of wary. We have to be wary about the product claims, especially if it's
Yeah.
an exempt product.
Right.
And because we keep running into this over and over again. But seeing that 8-week photos, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. And really, I'm looking for ways to convince our applicators that it's worth their time to learn how to use a new product. And that really got them fired up. They really went and started to use it.
And you might have a new business idea there, you know.
Well, Chris, one of the problems with some of these organics is because they're so easy to bring to market, they come, they go.
Yeah.
And then the distributors, you want to order them, and then you get it gets in policy somewhere, and then you can't get it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Avenger seems like it's stood some of the test of time, but we've seen other products come and go, and it's sort of frustrating on the end user part because you push so hard to get something.
Right.
And you get it listed so you could use it in a particular situation or scenario or
Right.
municipality, and then you can't even get it.
My hope is that because Weed Slayer did have to get over one of those hurdles immediately with this challenge that was brought against their label, and they did clear that hurdle, is that it's here to stay. But yeah, that's our experience as well.
Where are you buying it?
Yeah, you were gonna ask me that, and
I did find it on Amazon.
Yeah, I
'cause
just-
we were looking
Amazon.
at it. You can buy
Can
it.
you?
Weed Slayer on Amazon.
We had to go to a.
They're taking over, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember who the current distributor was that we bought it from.
If you do find that info, I'm sure people would be interested.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else, or should we move on to Phytopthera? All right. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys this sort of overarching Phytopthera risk management in the Presidio talk that I gave at the SOD conference a couple of months ago. And I'll just say that I've done a very deep dive into Phytopthera over the past 5 years. So this is kind of like a sprawling tale that doesn't have a neat beginning, middle, and end. And I'm actually starting right in the middle here. Does anybody know who this plant is?
Was.
Well, it still is. This is the Raven's manzanita. This is an endangered species. There's only one wild individual left, and this is it. And 5 years ago, it crashed pretty significantly. And so this image shows you what it looked like 4 years ago. There's only one wild individual. We are tasked with maintaining it and making sure nothing bad happens to it, and then this. So that's the middle of the story, but let me just give you a little bit of information. There's probably a lot of you know what the Presidio is, but just in general, who we are. We're a 1,400-acre urban national park. We have 16 rare or endangered plant species there. One of our missions is to preserve and protect the resources there. So preserve and protect those. There's some pictures down here that are hard to see of just a handful of the endangered species, but we've got 2 endangered manzanita, the Franciscan manzanita and the Raven's manzanita. And the Presidio is divided up into 3 vegetation management zones. That means when you look at the Presidio as a whole, there are different ways that we manage the landscapes based on what zone we've allocated. We've got the landscape zone, which is all of the ornamental landscapes that people use for recreation or that are around the buildings there. We've got the native habitat zone, which is all the areas where we're doing restoration projects. So taking out landfills and restoring to native vegetation, or taking out trees and restoring to native vegetation. And we've got our forest. So all of the stands of trees we call our forest. So we've got those 3 vegetation management zones. And mostly what we do in those management zones is manage for weeds. Weeding is the primary thing that we do in those zones. However, kind of maybe the second most common thing that we do in those zones is plants that come from nurseries. And here we are planting in the landscape management zone, and in the forest management zone, and in the native plant community zone. And all of these plants are coming from nurseries. And our aim is to enhance the landscapes by planting plants from nurseries. And about 5 years ago, we had a little bit of a paradigm shift within our own nursery because we found Phytophthora in our nursery. And before that, I had always kind of thought like, yeah, probably Phytophthora is in our nursery, but if we find it, what are we going to do about it? How big a deal is it? And I changed my way of thinking after realizing just how much damage it could do to rare and endangered species, and kind of realizing that the mission of our nursery is to enhance habitat restoration, not take it down. So we really started to take Phytophthora seriously in our own nursery, and our own nursery grows all of the plants that get planted into our habitat restoration projects. So it was important for us to kind of focus and figure out how to stop growing Phytophthora in our nursery. And it was a major, major undertaking. We totally renovated our shade house, meaning it used to have a weed cloth floor, but we put in permeable concrete to reduce the level or eliminate the level of pooling under our tables. We did a full clean of the greenhouses, disinfected the greenhouses. We didn't stop using recycled pots, but we started sterilizing all of them in between uses.
What disinfectant chemical did you choose?
We started by using bleach, which is not easy to use. It doesn't stay stable for very long, and you have to keep everything submerged for a pretty long time to get what you need. Yeah, which I think is a long time. So this is doing bleach, but we've since moved to starting to use steam. And we can do that because we bought a boiler, and we bought it kind of at first to heat up the potting mix that we use. And it's kind of a we had some trepidation going into this because we didn't want to heat it so much that we killed everything in the potting mix. So we bought a boiler that has an aerator that can kind of regulate the temperature so that when we pump steam into our potting mix, we're only getting it, we can get it to about 140, 150, 160, and not get it to the really high temperatures that it would go to if we weren't using this system. But because we have this steamer that we're using to pasteurize our soil, we can also use steam to heat our pots. We did have, it was not easy to figure out what temperature and how to do the pots. We melted pots.
Phytophthora remora is actually rather fragile, but the microflora that you might want to preserve in your potting soil is the question. And I was actually asking about the surfaces of the buildings and the floor that you use, because steam sterilizing is fairly straightforward for Phytophthora remora. But you have all these other surfaces that can land on, like bay tree leaves.
Yeah.
Their favorite habitat.
Well, are you asking about the?
So yeah, I was asking about what you use for a disinfectant.
On the benches?
Did you switch to, say, Lysol instead of?
So yes, the answer is yes. We've been using Lysol in a pressure washer. We don't do this disinfectant on the greenhouse. We do that once every 2 years or so. But yes, we're using Lysol through a pressure washer. But in the interim, when we're not doing the whole full clean, we use isopropyl alcohol, 70% isopropyl alcohol, to disinfect benches between crops.
We had Stephen Swain here 2 months ago, and last month he also was at the International Society of Arboriculture Plant Pest and Disease Seminar in Santa Fe. So I've heard a lot about
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I thought it was
all right, so we disinfect pots, we pasteurize soil, and this is hard to see, but this is a picture of 2 nursery staff standing inside a green dumpster discarding plants that we've grown. And those plants were grown with love by our staff and by our volunteers, and it was really, really difficult to throw away those plants. But when we found Phytophthora, we discarded the plants. How do you find it? All right, let me show you. Good question. All right, so how are we going to do quality control? Now we've done all those things. How do we know it's working? All right, so has anybody heard of pair baiting? Yeah, so it's the thing that we do at Presidio Nursery now. We take hard green pears, and pears are used for finding Phytophthora because they have a very thick skin compared to most fruits, and Phytophthora is a very strong pathogen. Phytophthora can make it through the skin of a pear, whereas most other pathogens cannot. So the idea is take a pear, put it in your sample, and if there's Phytophthora in that sample, presumably it will find the pear and make it through the skin, and you'll be able to tell that it's there. So here's what we do. We buy lots of green hard pears. They know us at Safeway. They know they know that we're going to ask, like, do you have a new shipment of pears? I need your hardest and your greenest pears.
It's just a physical thing. It's just that they're hard skins, like watermelon could be used, for example.
Too thick, but yes.
It's not the chemistry of the pear. It's just the physical.
No, it's the fact that the pear has sugars in it, and so it's going to be attractive to the pathogen. And the fact you could use an apple, but many pathogens can make it through the skin of an apple, whereas this is a harder fruit to break through. And so if something makes it through, it's probably Phytophthora.
Is Bartlett or Danjou?
So I like Danjous. Other people use Bartletts, but my preference is Danjous, but you can't find them year-round. Okay, so here's another fuzzy picture that I'll explain what we're doing here. So this is the way that we do it in our nursery. We went through various ways of trying to get a sample to put a pear in, but this is where we landed. This is a very fuzzy picture of some pots of plants that are on a rack, and there's a plastic sheeting under the pots, and we've watered the plants, and the water is coming off the plastic sheeting into a container, and we've got a pear floating in that container. So that's what we do. We're testing the effluent that comes through the irrigation, through the pots, and collects into one bin. And so we're essentially testing whole lots at once. We're not testing individual plants. So we've identified the plant species that we're growing that are sort of the most likely to be infected with Phytophthora, and we test lots of those plants within our nursery as quality control. So after you've had your pear floating in your sample for a handful of days, you evaluate it for lesions. And so you need to get some good practice at this because it can get confusing, but it's totally doable. So here's a pear, and so when we buy the green pears, usually they have a blemish or two on them, and because lots of pathogens can make it through blemishes, you've got to mark the areas that have blemishes. So that's why you've got all these sharpied areas. Like these areas had blemishes before the test, so if you get these lesions in areas that had blemishes before the test, that's not an indication of Phytophthora. That's probably an indication of something like Pythium. So that's not what you're looking for. This is what you're looking for. And it's a little bit, again, these are very stark differences. It's not always this easy to see, but Phytophthora will infect the pear anywhere, not just where the blemish was. And it'll be a gradient that doesn't look like it's like, I don't know how to explain it. It looks different, and you can't tell in these pictures, but this is mushy and this is not. So that's another way to tell. So this tends, once you do this, you kind of get good at it, but I'm never 100% sure. Like I could look at this and say, oh my God, that's probably Phytophthora, but I would want confirmation, and I can't tell you what species it is. So when we get something like this on our pears, we say not Phytophthora. When we get something like this on our pears, we say probably Phytophthora, and we send it to CDFA for confirmation, and so that they can tell us which species of Phytophthora it is. All right. So we've been testing our plants since our 2014 crop, and this was the crop that we initially, kind of the light bulb went off and said, oh, Phytophthora is a big deal, let's look for it and see who we have. we found 4 different species of Phytophthora in our nursery. Not a huge percentage, but it was there, and this is a big deal to us. We definitely wanted to clean that up. So we did all those improved pest management practices, and we've been testing since. And we haven't had any Phytophthora detections in our crops since then. These are great numbers, but at some point we're going to find it. I don't think that we have 100% impenetrability for Phytophthora, but the BMPs really are working. So we're feeling good about our own nursery plants. However, we also buy plants from commercial ornamental nurseries, and this is a picture that I took in a commercial ornamental nursery, and the BMPs are really not up to snuff. So it's like, okay, now we've cleaned up our own nursery, but we're bringing out all these plants from other nurseries, and we're planting them into the landscape zone, into the forest zone. Like, should we be worried about that? So we started testing the commercial nursery plants, and so we're doing pair baiting, and we're also doing this sort of off-the-shelf Phytophthora test that is okay, but it has the same problem as a pear in that if you get a positive on it, it could be Phytophthora, it could be Pythium, but you don't have that lesion, and you really can't tell if it's Phytophthora or Pythium, whereas on a pear you can. So if we get a positive on this, we move on to the pear bait and see whether or not it's Phytophthora or Pythium. Anyway, so these are number of lots tested. So like I said, we test in big groups of plants of all the same species. So that 298 is number of lots. That's actually thousands of plants. And as of now, about 15% of the lots that I've tested have been infected. Earlier on, before we started figuring out which nurseries to work with, it was more like 30%. But look at all these species that we've detected, and one of them was previously undocumented in the US. Like, we really are buying things that we don't want to buy from commercial nurseries. And it's like, how are we going to deal with this? So we started to kind of look around and see whether or not we could identify growers who are growing in a manner that's kind of comparable to the way that our own in-house nursery is growing. So we went to the Oregon State University suggestions for good growing practices and came up with sort of like a checklist questionnaire for growers, and we called up about 30 or 40 growers, did phone interviews, identified a handful of growers, or 6 or 7 growers that we thought might be worth visiting their site to confirm whether or not they are in fact doing these things. But it's been really hard to find growers that fall sort of in this green flag category. These BMPs are doable, but they're not standard in the nursery industry. All right, so given that it's been hard to find qualified growers, we thought, all right, how are we going to mitigate the risk that we take when we buy plants from nurseries? So we kind of thrashed about to try to figure out how to evaluate our risk and landed on a method that I'm not going to go into too deep, but out of Australia, and Australia is way ahead of us in terms of dealing with Phytophthora. But it's a method where you kind of take a look at the consequences of bringing in a pest and having it established and spread versus the likelihood of doing that. So we applied this to our situation and decided that, okay, we can kind of get a grip on likelihood of bringing Phytophthora in on nursery plants. Very low if they're grown by our nursery, and then the gradient kind of goes up all the way through. Okay, the risk goes slightly up if we're talking about a qualified grower, up again if we're talking about plants from a standard grower that we have tested. The tests are not perfect. And then way up if we're talking about untested plants from a standard grower. And then the consequences go from minor if you're planting these plants into a site that doesn't contain rare or endangered species, or doesn't drain to such a site, and then it goes all the way up to sites that do have endangered species or that drain to sites with endangered species, because Phytophthora is carried on water. All right, so we decided that we wanted to stay in this yellow zone, but wanted to avoid being in the red zone. So how are we going to do that? We came up with sort of this decision-making tree for project managers about whether or not they need to test the plants that they're using in their project for Phytophthora. So if the plants are turf is not a carrier of Phytophthora, then you don't need to test your plants. If the plants were grown by a qualified grower or under a qualified grow contract, meaning we're buying lots and lots of plants, we're paying you to grow them for us, and we want you to grow them under these conditions, then you don't need to test your plants. But if that's not true, then the question is, will the plants be planted in the native plant community zone? If the answer is yes, you have to test all your plants. If the answer is no, then you have to evaluate the topography of your site and determine whether or not it drains to the native plant community zone. And if it does, then yes, you have to test all your plants. And if it doesn't, then no. And it's kind of a rigmarole to go through all of this. And project managers generally can't do it on their own. I'm involved in all of this, and it slows down projects, I will tell you that. So if you do need to test your plants, then you test your plants and you have another set of decision-making processes to go through. Was Phytophthora detected in the lot? Nope. All right, you can plant your plants. If yes, then I have to answer these questions. Is this Phytophthora species rated A, B, or Q by CDFA, so those that they think are really significant dangers to agriculture or the state in general? If it gets one of those ratings by CDFA, then you have to discard the plant lot. If it doesn't get one of those ratings, we still have another question. Is it known to cause widespread dieback in California native ecosystems? And that's a list that I keep based on information from folks in the habitat restoration world. If the answer is yes, then you have to discard your plants. And then the next question is the Phytophthora species known to be present in the Presidio? And that's a list I've been doing, I'll show you in a minute, a lot of what I call baseline testing in the Presidio. So we have a list that we know are already present in the Presidio. If the answer is no, we haven't found it, then you have to discard your plant lot. If the answer is yes, then you can plant your plants. So we are planting some plants with Phytophthora, and this is against the advice of people like Matteo Garbaletto and others who tell us that every introduction increases your risk of disease. So this is something that I would like to get away from. But this is what we're currently doing. They hybridize, yeah. Okay, so like I said, we have been, this is a lot of information for you to look at, and I thought I had put it up here in steps, but all right. I've been doing kind of baseline sampling throughout the Presidio and sampling before and after we put in plants in our landscapes. And so if you look at this right here, this shows you 5 projects where I tested the landscape before we renovated it and after we put in plants, tested plants from commercial nurseries. And I do not like these results at all. We tested plants and we come up with like 18% of my samples before renovation had Phytophthora and 40% after renovation. Like, what is this? Like, we're not getting anything with our testing. 0 before renovation, 20% after renovation. And like, it's not good. There's only one site where I found less Phytophthora after renovation. So this makes me feel like our testing is not buying us what we want it to buy us. I only have one site where, after going through the decision-making process, it was determined that we didn't need to test the plants before putting them in. And on that site, we have comparable before and after. And then here's what it looks like when we use Presidio nursery plants. We did see a reduction before and after, but an increase before and after on there. So this is just to tell you that I don't think we have a real handle on managing Phytophthora by testing plants from commercial nurseries. So that brings me back to this. Like, I feel like all of this is not buying us what we want, but there is some room for getting better here. So we've been focused on trying to find more qualified growers. As of right now, we only have 2 commercial nurseries that we've visited and have confirmed that their growing practices meet what we need, and that's Devil Creek and Rana Creek. And then our own nurseries, there are 4 nurseries throughout the GGNRA. So those are our qualified growers. And then we have a handful of growers who don't, in their general practice, meet all of our standards, but they're pretty close. And if we gave them instructions to do specific things differently for a contract grow, they could. So these are growers that are authorized to do a qualified grow for us under specific best management practices that are not their standard practices. And we've been making a real push. So like I said, our own in-house nursery generally only grows for our habitat restoration projects. So they generally only grow California natives. So they don't grow a lot of what our landscape architects are looking to put into our landscape zone. However, because of all this problem, we have started to collect propagules and started to grow ornamental species within our own nursery so that we can avoid this issue of trying to find clean plants from commercial nurseries. So this is a big win for me. All right, so let me just show you what we've found through our 2 or 3 or 4 years of baseline, what I call baseline testing. All of the dots are areas where we took a sample and tested it, and all of the red dots are where we have found Phytopthera. And all those red dots are any species of Phytopthera, but I'll tell you we found about 20 different species of Phytopthera in the Presidio. And so it kind of looks like it's kind of everywhere, but maybe not in a couple places. But for those of us who have spent a lot of time in the Presidio, when we look at this map, we see like, oh, and this is not going to be a surprise to you guys, but Phytopthera shows up where there's water. This area is the blue is where there's water, and the yellow is where the soil is very sandy. So in areas where it's very sandy, we are not finding it much. We are finding it in a couple of places. But I'm starting to think that maybe we need to look at this idea of Phytophthora holding capacity of a site instead of, and think of it more like, is this site vulnerable to Phytophthora and not sort of across the board. And then I just want to leave you with this image. So this was the image that I started with, the Ravens manzanita that crashed in 2016, and it's not all is lost. It definitely is not doing well, but we do still have some green growth in there. It's not dead. We are going to be doing phosphide treatments on it to try to help it recover to whatever extent it can recover. But it's not dead. And then just some pictures of my interns who have helped me do all of this work, who I really, woo woo for interns. This is a graphic that my husband did for one of my interns. All right, any questions about Phytophthora?
Do you ever mention a problem with cinnamon?
Yeah, we definitely find, so we find it, and we find it in areas where we're having some trouble with specific species of plant establishment, but but on the manzanita, it has not been cinnamoma. It's been Phytophthora pseudocryptogaea. But yeah, cinnamoma is one of those that we would not plant in the Presidio because it has shown to be problematic in California native ecosystems.
We have it on the grounds,
Yeah. Hey, Kristen.
First a comment, wow, that was a huge undertaking, I can't even imagine, and regardless of the outcomes, I know you guys are still trying to sort this out, the amount of information that you brought out of this, that also I'm sure you're sharing with other nurseries as well, is huge.
Interns, that's how it happens.
Also, just seeing the relationship with the CDMA or CA, and I'm curious how that relationship is going and whether the data you're giving back to them is that useful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have had. I really enjoy working with CDFA. They're very, very responsive and very helpful, and have been really a huge part of us trying to wrap our heads around how we want to explore this. And so they're a regulatory agency. And so and I have been sharing all of the results with them. And my hope is that they are able to take this information plus from everybody else and use it to add. So right now they're focused on agriculture. So that rating system really is focused on protecting agriculture in the state. And my hope is that they will fold in ecosystem restoration into that and add more Phytophthora species in those A or B categories. And I think that's happening. But I would also like them to do more regulation of the nursery industry and try to get best management practices elevated to a greater extent. And they're struggling with that. They did start a voluntary kind of certification system that is similar to the checklist that I walk into a nursery with when I'm trying to see whether or not we're going to qualify a grower as a qualified grower. But my checklist that I use is somewhat bare bones. Like we're really trying to meet the nursery. We're trying to meet sort of the people who are doing good best management practices where they are. Whereas I think the certification process that CDFA has, because they've been working with some really great pathologists who are really knowledgeable, and those pathologists convinced CDFA to have even higher standards. I think the nurseries are having a hard time meeting them, and so are not going in for this voluntary program. And so I worry about that. But yes, CDFA is very interested in the information that we're generating by testing all of these commercial nursery plants. And I continue to feed them and continue to talk to them to try to nudge that in that direction, because it's the only way that we're going to be able to buy clean plants is if the nursery industry recognizes this as an issue. And I totally understand that the nursery industry, like the way they get their business is by having a lot of variety in their stock. So growing a lot of variety and bringing in plants from other nurseries, which is problematic, and then having low prices. Like that's how they make their sales, and this is on their radar, but it's not within their business plans. And so I recognize that that's an issue, but if we're gonna be able to buy clean plants, my sense is that we're gonna end up paying more for them.
What's the name of it?
Follow up, and when you test and send results to them Phytophthora from a commercial nursery that falls into their agricultural Phytophthora restricted, do they respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, they responded to the one that we found that was not, had not yet been found in California. They did respond. Yeah.
What's the name of the state certification?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the name of it. I would have to look it up. Yeah. All right.
Other questions?
Have you tried solarization?
We have looked into solarization and have done sort of like there's an online calculator out of Oregon State University where you can kind of plug in your weather information and your site, and we don't have the conditions that would for it to work, but it can work in areas where you get more solar hours. Yeah.
We used it for spots.
Yeah, there is an online calculator. I encourage anybody who wants to use it because it can work. Because we haven't been able to use it, we've brought our mobile boiler out into the field and tarped areas and tried to get the temperature of the soil at 12, 18 inches up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and I have had a lot of trouble doing that, of course, because steam moves up, not down, right? And we've experimented with different ways to try to get it to move down, and it's a major undertaking and uses a lot of diesel fuel and a lot of water. And while steam will kill it, but we don't have a good way to deliver it through the soil profile.
This is probably too big of a question, Don, but do you have any observations on how this compares with PUC's experiments?
Well,
experiences.
PCC, after their huge problem with Phytopthera tentaculata, had to go and it cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars to remove plants, try to treat infected places, because that's a new introduction of Phytopthera. And so they have gone to direct seeding.
Yeah, I know. This is another thing that worries the nursery industry. Like, are you trying to kill us? We want to stay in business.
And now they've established their own nursery.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I haven't visited it. I've heard it's
I
impressive.
haven't seen either.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you almost have to do direct seeding or something like that if you want to be certain.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to me like more exploration into which species do well in direct seeding and how long does it take after direct seeding to get, to the size that would have been comparable if you had just planted a nursery grown plant. It does seem like there's going to be a fair amount of work in, direct seeding.
You had a slide that was about testing sites before and after renovation. That must be a different type of testing than pair baiting.
Yeah, that's pair baiting.
Are the plants already in the ground?
Yep. Yeah. So what we do is we have a protocol for field sampling, and the protocol is to walk into a site, survey it for the symptoms that might be indicative of Phytophthora, and focus on those plants for digging up roots and taking a root and a soil sample back to the lab and doing the pair baiting on that. And we look for symptomatic plants. If we don't find them, then we go for woody plants, which tend to be more of an issue for Phytophthora. So we have a whole protocol for field sampling.
What's your process of destroying plants? And you plant in the field with Phytophthora, do you remove them?
We don't. In the field, we do not. We leave them in place. There's not much, because we could remove the plant, but we're not going to remove the contamination. So in most cases, it just stays in place, and in a lot of cases, the plants are fine. But if the plants are not fine and we're replacing them, then we have tried to steam the soil. We have not been terribly successful, and so we're just kind of moving toward trying to replant with Phytophthora-resistant plants because we don't have a good way we don't have a way to eliminate it in the field. But if we find it in a nursery plant, before we planted it, we compost it.
So what have you found is the best way to disinfect boots and vehicles?
Yeah, we use 70% isopropyl alcohol just because it's so stable and so easy to carry around in a squirt bottle. We buy a lot of it.
So you do even do vehicles, like tires?
We do tires with it, yeah. I mean, we brush off with a brush and then do tires with it, yeah. I mean, we try to stay off it. We have, our standard is in the rainy season, try to stay on paved areas so that you don't have to disinfect your tires. But if you do go and get mud on your tires, isopropyl alcohol. It's been kind of expensive, but because of stability and ease of use, that's what we're using.
Any other questions? Well,
All right.
really impressive amount of work you guys have been doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
It helps everyone. And so let's give this. We had some pilot testing of rechargeable landscape equipment went on with Public Works and Rec Parks, courtesy of the Air Resources Board, the State Air Resources Board, and their equipment trailer. First of all, thank you all for engaging in that, those of you who are participating in those pilot tests. We gathered the data from this, and I have mentioned this in the previous meeting, but we haven't really shown you the detailed results. But Jen Monet, who is my colleague at the Department of Environment, did the work on it, and it makes sense to bring it to you so you can see a little bit more about what people liked and what people didn't like in terms of rechargeable equipment. As you might remember, there are multiple reasons for doing this. One is, of course, we're moving away from the more hazardous herbicides whenever possible, and often that means moving to more physical methods for certain situations. But there are risks to that too. If you have gas fumes blowing your face all day, it's another 80 cases per million of cancer that can result from that, according to CARB's numbers. So it's something we want to move away from spewing gas fumes. You also want to have a lower greenhouse gas impact. And luckily we have clean power here. So when we use electricity in San Francisco, that's pretty low greenhouse gas impact. We have gravity-fed water systems and so forth for the most part. So I just wanted to give that little bit of context, and then we'll turn it over to you, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Oh, and I should say, I'm sorry, and I forgot to say it in front of our commission, there are multiple other reasons why we want to move in this direction, and one of which is the people who are affected are the people who are doing the work on the ground. It's an environmental justice issue, and so it's especially important for that reason too, for worker health, for endangered or communities, for poor people, essentially. So that's part of the picture too.
So as Chris mentioned, there are several issues that we're trying to address, reducing air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, and also ensuring that the alternatives we're using to herbicides are actually safe and effective. And so to address them, last summer, the Department of the Environment, along with Public Works and the Department of Rex and Park, got together and collaborated on this pilot program to test out the latest models of rechargeable landscaping tools. So it's exciting because the results are in, and they seem quite promising. So first of all, I wanted to thank the 25 people from Public Works and the Department of Rec and Parks who took their time to test out these products. Without them, the pilot wouldn't have been possible. They sampled 6 different categories of products, which included leaf blowers, edgers, chainsaws, hedge trimmers, string trimmers, and pole saws. And among them, there were 7 different brands represented: Echo, Greenworks, Makita, Oregon, Stihl, and Milwaukee. What they did is after testing out each product, they would fill out a survey. And the survey looked at 6 different criteria. So there was comfort of use of the product, the power of the product, how well the battery held out, because that is quite a concern for these battery-powered products, as well as safety and health issues and noise. Oh, and quality of construction. That did come up a couple times. We, in addition to looking at these different qualities, we also asked for the different testers to give us an idea of whether they preferred the battery-powered tools to their more traditional gas-powered tools, and to also provide us comments on any of these tools. This, with the data that we got from them, we put it into charts like this. This is an example for the string trimmer. And as you can see, I would say it's probably pretty well divided. I think generally on the top you'll see are the tools that had the best results, and on the bottom is really the tool that had the worst results. But you'll also notice that one minor issue with this pilot program was that even though we had 25 participants helping us do this survey, because of the number of products that they're also testing out, the number of tools they're testing out, generally there are only maybe a couple people who are testing each product and giving their feedback. So, the sample sizes were pretty small. That said, we do feel pretty good about the results, just given how strongly people often felt. You can see where it's been highlighted green, that represents either excellent or best possible results. And where it's been highlighted red, we labeled it as not so great, which would be like a 2 out of 5, and then worst possible, which is a 1 out of 5, which is the worst possible. So, you know, even though there weren't that many results, people were quite opinionated about the products, one way or another. And overall, you see that the rechargeable tools ranked pretty well. In the far right column, we asked, you know, are these better than the gas-powered versions? Basically, do you prefer these battery-powered versions to their gas equivalents? And a lot of people actually said yes. Where they said no, it's interesting to see that actually, you know, it seems to be isolated to like maybe 1 or 2 products that are quite strongly known, like the Oregon string trimmer, the Greenworks string trimmer was, not so great. And again, I already mentioned that really when you look at overall, there still seems to be mostly concern about battery life. I also looked online to see if, you know, these were like replicated issues in general, and a lot of comments on these products' websites do say, you know, their main concern is, you know, the shortness of the battery life. Wouldn't it be great if this product had a different, you know, had that type of battery? You know, a lot of feedback having to do with the battery. And at the end, I would actually be, you know, I'd be more than happy to share the results for the other product categories. I do have printouts of the summary of these results. They don't include the testers' comments, but I can also, you know, share those with you if you want. And what we did with the results after that was we looked overall globally at, you know, maybe the top brands that had the most number of products, you know, that came up as being preferred to the gas-powered versions. And the reason that we wanted to do this was really because we have a kind of a longer-term goal. Maybe I should mention this at the end. Well, a longer-term goal of asking you folks whether you'd be interested in creating a citywide contract for these rechargeable tools. People seem to be really happy with them overall. Oh, going back, if you looked at all the survey results, you'd see that in every category, there are at least 1 or 2 products that do rank as better than the gas-powered equivalents. So there are, you know, good battery-powered equivalents to all of these tools available. And what we would like to know is, would you be interested in such a contract? It would allow for huge cost savings. We could invest in a certain, you know, number of types of batteries. So for example, if we just bought these rechargeable tools from, say, Echo, Husqvarna, and Milwaukee, then we would only need 3 different types of batteries that we could then share, which has a lot of benefits. And that's where I want to open it up to you.
Yeah, and so this is,
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. That's terrific. She did a lot of work to put the data together. And like, you know, like she said, that wasn't all the data you're looking at. The sheet that she showed you is just like a sample. So,
just so you can see.
Yeah, there's a lot more.
It's fun. It keeps going on for a little bit,
but it's a little overwhelming to try to look at all those tables in a room like this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
it's a little too much data.
You know, we put out the offer to do a citywide contract, but we don't really know how you buy these things, and there might be some very good reasons why it doesn't make sense to have a citywide contract. It's certainly easy for me if you don't, but I would love, you know, we would like to promote the technology any way that we can, and maybe it'd be helpful. It might be helpful to understand how you do buy these sorts of products. Is it just a once every 5 years you go out and buy a whole bunch of equipment, or is it? Is it a constant trickle of purchases? Is it something that's not suited for a citywide contract for some reason? I mean, is it easier for you to pay it through a departmental purchasing mechanism? Does anyone have any?
And also be interested in knowing if you're not interested in a citywide contract or in going from gas-powered to battery-powered tools, like why not? Like, what are the sticking points?
Yeah, sure.
That's helpful for us to know.
Yeah,
too.
because just so you know, for a citywide contract is where, you know, we would work with Office of Contract Administration. We kind of do the work to put the bids out with these specifications, and we would focus on the lines that you preferred to try to get the best price. And it would be a significantly better price. I'm not sure how much volume there is. So that's maybe one big sticking point. But these are expensive items, so that's on our side if we want to do a citywide contract. Anybody have any observations on this idea? Is it on why it might or might not work?
Just a question. So
Yeah.
if you have a citywide contract, is there a certain amount of equipment, like is there a quota equipment that has to be purchased annually?
No.
Or how does it work?
No, the way it works is it goes out to bid, and as part of the bid process, you have to give the bidders an estimate of what the volume might be like. There's nothing that really holds you to this, and everyone knows we can't know in advance how much people are going to buy, but it's sort of standard practice in these contracts so that bidders have an idea of how low they can go with prices. If you have historical data on purchases, it's better. I mean, the bidders love that, but usually we don't when you go out to bid on these things.
And then for purchases, it's still like any other purchase with, you know, payment into the fiscal year, we purchase it through our departmental budget, our divisional budgets.
Yes.
It's just at a lower price.
Yes, and it's actually, usually it's easier if there is a citywide term contract that's already been negotiated. You know, you don't have to get any bids, right? And if you're one of those wonky, unfortunate people who have to use the FSP system, the accounting system in the city, it's a lot easier there too, because you just push a button and it knows that term contract is there and the prices are already negotiated. Whereas I think with a departmental purchasing effort, you would have to go have some bids if it's over 10,000, generally.
So what would be the downside?
It takes some effort to put this together. If I don't see a lot of interest from the departments, I'm not going to do it. There may be, there's some uncertainty. I mean, OCA, Office of Contract Administration, has their own timelines on things and their own priorities, so we may not get it when we want it. It may be a year down the road. Other disadvantages, I mean, there's not really that, I can't think of any other disadvantages. It's just a piece of work, and if it's the case that if there are departments who are likely to be buying a significant amount of these tools in the next couple of years, then it might make sense to do it. If not, you can do it departmental.
As time goes by, the tools are getting better and the batteries are getting better.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to have some kind of contract, would it limit us to specific models, or would it be more encompassing, including newer models that are being
It can be structured any way. You can do it by brand with a percentage off list. That's typically what they would do. You have to specify what they mean by list price. So that would make it more flexible for new products. You could say we want Milwaukee string trimmers or whatever, and what percentage can you give us off your list price? Something like that. So, this is probably not what we usually talk about.
Sam was just going to say we got some DeWalt backpack blowers that have up 2 batteries, so it gives you a little bit more option, but they're a lot heavier and less powerful.
Yeah.
Haven't quite evaluated the long-term battery life, but they're not real popular with the crew because they just don't blast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's takes a lot longer, and difficult, especially on eucalyptus leaves. Eucalyptus globulus leaves like to lay down in front of a blower. They don't pop up at all with DeWalt. Did you test any DeWalts?
We didn't know.
There was not in the trailer.
The tools that we did test were provided to us by the California Air Resources Board, and they have this e-landscaping trailer that's basically full of these battery-powered tools, and DeWalt wasn't part of them.
And part of the difficult part of asking this question with this group is I don't actually know who makes a decision to buy this stuff for the departments, you know, at this level. I mean, Matt, are you the person in Rec Park, or is it the section supervisors? Section super. So they're actually more the people to ask these questions, probably.
They'll have a budget, or their manager will have the total budget.
Right. Right.
I think it's preference. Like if you have something, you have a certain brand. If you have like Milwaukee, you want to just get the same battery that you're dealing with.
Right.
But maybe you just use it still. It's better chainsaw oil than maybe have a couple brands. But I think it comes down to convenience of having the same battery that you can interchange with a bunch of
Right.
tools.
Well, I mean, so that kind of brings up some other possibilities. I mean, I'm just, you know, kind of thinking about citywide contracts, but there are other things that we could do with this information, which is, I mean, just make sure that it gets distributed to the right people, the park section supervisors or whatever. I don't know what the equivalent would be at Public Works. Uh-huh. So, similar setup, okay. So, in a way, I'm not asking the right people this question about a citywide contract, it sounds like.
I can say that we were definitely interested in battery-operated tools in general. We've got all Husqvarna stuff, and I'm sure we'll continue to buy the batteries, saws, pole saws, line trimmers.
I wonder if this might be just like, this is sort of a question to put out through the department directors, and they could just distribute to the right people and pose it that way. And, you know, if they're not, that's fine. If they're not interested, that's fine, but
I think we would be, because that's generally, we still need gas-powered stuff for certain, big cuts and so on, but in general, the battery stuff's working really great for us. So.
how do you buy them now?
Through West Coast contractors.
Uh-huh. Through a departmental, so you do it under $10,000?
Yes, that's pretty much how it goes.
Yeah.
West Coast,
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
it's pretty much the same. We use West Coast.
Okay.
And we try to keep it under 10,000 for each purchase.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that's not a problem? Easy enough?
Well, sometimes it is, but it's kind of like what they want.
Okay. So sometimes if you do a series of 10,000.
So we have to separate them out.
Right.
So we won't go over at one time.
Gotcha.
And you're buying, and you're specifically buying battery-powered tools under that contract, or do you mean
we only use the battery powered on night shifts, just because of the noise.
Oh, interesting.
Pretty much at Public Works we use gas for different reasons. Most likely power. We're dealing with a lot of phenol and campus grass, and they're just better power-wise.
Interesting.
But the battery powered line trimmers and blowers, they work good at night.
I was just going to say, most supervisors spoken to have said that they buy, they're not going to buy a whole new block, they're going to turn over a whole block. It's just as the equipment wears out, they are replacing the battery power. They're already kind of doing it in there. So
kind of doing it anyway, right?
They're not able to buy their whole suite all at once.
Which you don't have to, but if that's the case though, then they're doing smaller purchases and it's easier to do it through departmental contracts.
Would your contract be brand specific, or would it be through a reseller and you could buy multiple brands?
It would likely be, we would likely ask for the top brands that you all wanted for particular kinds of products. And so to narrow it down, because that way you'll get better prices on those. Okay, I think what I'm hearing is there's interest in the rechargeable technology, kind of doing it already. Not the decision makers aren't really here right now so much. It's more the section supervisors and maybe I need to communicate through a different means to find an answer to that question. But in the meantime, I mean, I think it's really exciting that, you know, batteries have changed so much recently, and everything I look at, the amount of power in the new batteries is just incredible, and it's kind of an exciting time. All the possibilities that are out there, whether it's scooters or skateboards or landscaping equipment. So, in any case, we will loop back on this through a different channel, and to try to ask the question. I mean, any other comments about the rechargeable equipment in general? Topic?
Rework steps. A lot of people complain that it was heavy.
Uh-huh.
I know it's not the best battery, but there is a backpack harness. You
Uh-huh.
can carry the battery on your back,
Mhm.
and it has an adapter that goes into the equipment.
Mhm.
So if people otherwise liked it, that's the solution.
I don't remember what the
Good
comments were
feedback.
like on that. Thank you. Okay. Well, now we have a little time left over for the traditional problem-solving session. Thank you.